The state of Missouri has certainly given Mizzou a leg up on NIL initially, but you knew states like Florida weren't going to stand for this forever. So let's talk about this landscape and how it might affect Jayvan, Boggs, and others coming up right now on Locked On Mizzou.
You are Locked On Mizzou, your daily podcast on the Missouri Tigers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hail you true sons and daughters, I'm John Miller, your Mizzou mafioso and the central scrutinizer of Missouri Tigers football and basketball. Yes, on the road once again here in the sunny state of Florida. I want to talk about Florida actually to start the show here. And also, I think if you're worried about Harrison Mevis at this point, no offense to him, I'm really not that worried for the 2024 season. Also, Aaron Rowe of Tolton High School in Columbia, Missouri. Well, his ranking took a fairly significant drop. What exactly does that mean? I'm going to explain that coming up a little later on the show. First, I want to start by reminding you that today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off your first purchase. And interestingly, well, some big news out of the state of Florida as I happen to be sitting my rear end in the very state of Florida as we speak. Florida with some big changes legislatively to name, image, and likeness for all intents and purposes. I'll just too long didn't read it for you. Basically, Florida high school athletes now are going to be eligible to receive name, image, and likeness benefits. Now, in Missouri, this seems a little bit more even extreme, at least to my uneducated, non-lawyerly analysis. This seems like even more of an aggressive take on NIL than what Missouri did. Now, just as a reminder, Missouri, their legislation basically allowed high school players to start receiving NIL under specific circumstances. In other words, if you sign with a Missouri institution, an in-state school, then you can start getting money. So that basically was a real aggressive move and also kind of a thumb in the nose to the rest of the country saying, hey, you don't like it? Well, too bad. You know what? I think a lot of Missouri fans are okay with that because we felt like, well, we're not exactly a blue blood program. We've never had the most money in the world, all that kind of stuff. So a little bit of anything that can lower the playing field just a tiny bit, I think is obviously a positive from a selfish perspective, from a Missouri fan's perspective. But also zooming out a little bit and just looking at the bigger picture of all this, one thing that's interesting to me is, of course, you'll see lots of comments from people saying that, well, this type of thing is ruining sports, it's ruining college football. But what's interesting to me is that no one ever says that kind of stuff about music or individual sports, for instance. Like, nobody ever said Justin Bieber shouldn't have been allowed to make money. Like, oh, where are the NIL laws reining in his money? And individual sports, same deal. Nobody really seems to care if Simone Biles is a millionaire, for example. So anyway, just a bigger picture thing there that maybe people should examine their own thoughts more, because individual sports, hey, do whatever you want. But man, people get really weird with team sports, don't they? And wanting to control everything. But from a Missouri perspective, what's interesting here is Jayvan Boggs, a Cocoa Beach, Florida product, big-time receiver prospect who decommitted from Ohio State just a couple short months ago. Well, Missouri has been one of the teams heavily pursuing Boggs, maybe even thought to be in the driver's seat in some circles. This may affect that. That really might. Boggs ended up canceling his visit to USC recently, by the way. So now Missouri, one of three teams in there, I believe, with UCF and also Georgia as well. You've got to think this Florida NIL law would help UCF, at least for the time being. But again, it's not contingent on you signing with a Florida school, as far as I can tell, like the Missouri law is. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong there. Again, I'll fully admit, again, I'm not a lawyer, didn't read every single bit of that legislation, but as far as I can tell, again, this is even more of an aggressive high school NIL legislation situation down here in Florida. Obviously, Florida, one of the biggest hotbeds of high school talent in the country. So this is certainly an interesting landscape that we got to keep watching here. Now, you may have seen a note out from a Carolina Panthers beat reporter that Harrison Mevis is a perfect 20 for 20, at least from his observations in minicamp, again, with the Carolina Panthers. So obviously, before Missouri, those some big shoes to fill there at kicker. But I have to be honest, I'm not nearly as worried about that spot as a lot of Mizzou fans who want to fret about a missed field goal at a crucial time that hasn't even happened yet. And don't get me wrong, Harrison Mevis was obviously great. He was a tremendous place kicker for Missouri, but the God's honest is over the last 15, 20 years or so, has Missouri to me has had lots of good to great kickers. Jeff Wolford obviously immediately springs to mind. And honestly, I think Missouri fans have been a little bit spoiled at the kicker position. I think Missouri fans have been a little spoiled at the quarterback position as well. But my main point here is that for all of the fretting about, oh no, new kicker, all this good stuff, well, number one, it's obvious to me that Missouri being Eli Drinkwitz and the rest of the staff, really believes in Blake Craig, the guy who is presumed to replace Harrison Mevis this fall. Obviously, no experience, pressure in front of SEC crowds and all that stuff is a different animal than kicking in practice. I understand all of that. But really, when is the last time that kicker really cost Missouri anything? I'm trying to think of it. Yes, Mevis missed a 28-yard field goal, something like that would have won the game in 2022 against Auburn. Okay, that's one I can think of off the top of my head. We've also had a lot of impressive game-winning kicks as well, including, Mevis's own 62-yarder against Kansas State. Was it 61 or 62? I'm already forgetting. Regardless, the longest kick in SEC history made by Mevis to win that ball game, a crucial ball game against Kansas State last year. Also, 2021 certainly we didn't lose to Boston College because of a field goal. I'll promise you that. Again, an incredible kick by Mevis to tie that ball game at the end of regulation. Really the only majorly, other than that Mevis kick against Auburn, of course, Andrew Baggett missed a rather infamous field goal against South Carolina in 2013 in Columbia, Missouri, that is. That was heartbreaking at the time. But ultimately, it just didn't matter all that much. Missouri still ends up making the SEC title game that season in a game that was essentially the Final Four. If the Tigers were to beat Auburn in that game, they would have played for the national championship that year. So, again, all the consternation I've seen by at least I'd say a significant portion of the fan base about kicker, I don't know. I think they're borrowing trouble a little bit, as the old phrase goes. I think they're worrying about something that, I don't know, isn't all that likely to happen. Look at Missouri history. How many times has a field goal cost us a massive moment in the season? I just can't think of a lot of examples of that. And on the previous edition of Locked On Mizzou, I talked a lot about how this is an absolutely crucial season for Dennis Gates and Missouri, and just, frankly, Dennis Gates and his coaching career and its future in general. Well, I had some people online say that, you know what, Dennis Gates is going to get 2 more seasons no matter what. I got to say, I'm not so sure about that, especially when you consider that for all the ballyhooing of his high school recruiting rankings, hey, those guys actually have to pay off eventually, and that's going to take some patience. Will Missouri fans have a ton of patience? If next year's a disaster, let's talk a little more basketball. And also Aaron Rowe getting moved down pretty significantly in the rankings over at On3. Let's get to all that here in just a little bit. But as you know, folks, I love to golf, and one of my biggest tips for anybody who is a beginner at the game of golf, just buy in, get yourself fitted for clubs. And that's exactly what I did a couple weekends ago. I went in and swung the PXG Black Ops driver at PXG Kansas City. I'm telling you, it's a total game changer. The thing just feels absolutely solid, beautiful craftsmanship. And frankly, Jacob there, I spent an hour on their TrackMan simulator. He got me absolutely dialed in with loft angle, 10 degree versus 9 degree. Hey, I was hitting a little fade there at first. He got me straightened out. I'm telling you, Jacob made me a believer. PXG made me a believer. They'll do the same for every golfer in Kansas City. Visit pxg.com/lockedonmizzou to schedule your fitting at PXG Kansas City. That's at 7517 West 119th Street in Overland Park. Get fitted for any club, and you'll get a dozen free golf balls. That's pxg.com/lockedonmizzou to schedule your fitting. pxg.com/lockedonmizzou. Limit 1 dozen golf balls per person. Promotion ends June 30th. Other terms and conditions may apply. See store for details. And it is NBA Finals time, game 1 tonight. And boy, I would be awfully excited to go to a game. How cool would that be? Well, Gametime makes getting NBA Finals tickets even faster and easier. Prices on the Gametime app actually go down the closer it gets to tip-off. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Gametime takes all the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets. And I'll just tell you, I just bought an MLB ticket, saw the Royals in a really fun game against the Detroit Tigers a couple weeks ago, before my PXG fitting, by the way. Just great seats, great price, really easy experience. Gametime is absolutely the way to take the guesswork out of buying tickets to Major League Baseball, the NBA Finals, concerts, or anything else. So download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off your first purchase. Download Gametime today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Columbia guard Aaron Rowe plays at Father Tolton High School this past season, was the first and is the first and only commitment of the 2025 high school class so far for Dennis Gates and his squad at Missouri. But you know what? Rowe, a guy who has been ranked pretty consistently, I would say in the top 25 to 30 or so from what I've seen so far. Well, he dropped pretty significantly to 78th overall at On3. And frankly, as I've said recently, I think On3 probably has the best resources and recruiting information out there, especially with football, but I think that's probably true with basketball as well at this point. And from my perspective, I'll just say that I think Aaron Rowe is a really, really good prospect. I think he's absolutely a guy that Dennis Gates and Missouri fans should be happy is in the fold. But I'll be completely honest with you. I've seen Rowe play in person once, and just once, by the way. Wasn't probably the strongest game he's played. I'll just say that I think, number one, I think 78th is probably a little bit closer to where I would evaluate Rowe. Again, a top 100 guy, somebody you absolutely want. But is he a borderline McDonald's All-American, which is what a top 25 type of rating would suggest? Frankly, I just don't see it, at least not yet. Again, Rowe, just a junior in high school, folks. He's still got plenty of time to get better. And he's a guy with good size, good feel for the game, a good handle, good passer, seems like a good teammate, all that good stuff. But frankly, from what I could see, the shot is just not there yet. The scoring ability, just not quite there yet, at least not at that high level that would make you to believe. Again, I hope this isn't coming off as overly critical of Rowe here. That's not the point whatsoever. I'm happy to have him hopefully coming still as a Missouri Tiger if he stays to his commitment, Dennis Gates sticks around, and all that good stuff. But to that point, if Dennis Gates sticks around, well, I'm telling you, folks, I think this is not a prediction whatsoever. My prediction is Dennis Gates will absolutely be around after next season. I'm just telling you, it's within the realm of possibility that he gets fired after next season, because not only imagine a season where Missouri disappoints on the floor once again in terms of the win-loss record, but what if this ballyhooed recruiting class just doesn't look quite as good its first year as it did on paper? I personally am a ginormous fan of Peyton Marshall. I just think that kid is going to be a star. Plus, you've got Anor Boateng, who is the highest-ranked guy, Marcus. I mean, lots of really impressive guys in that class, but just to expect that these true freshmen are going to be ready to compete immediately, I think that's maybe assuming a little bit too much. And again, as long as really just as important as the record for Dennis Gates and his future at Missouri and, well, really his coaching future in general, because if he gets fired from Missouri, boy, that's going to knock him down a lot of pegs just in terms of his trajectory, right? So it's a huge year for him personally, probably even bigger for him personally than it is for Missouri in general. But again, I just think all the people who think that, well, Gates is definitely safe after next season, I just don't think that's accurate, especially with a new athletic director in place, especially in a world where Vanderbilt, for example, was willing to buy Jerry Stackhouse out to approximately $15 million or something like that. I mean, we're in truly unprecedented territory in terms of the amount of money that's being thrown around in this sport. I'm just saying, if you think Dennis Gates and his buyout is going to be prohibitive from Missouri doing what it wants to do regardless after next basketball season, I just think they're going to do what they want to do. That's my point. I don't think Dennis Gates is safe whatsoever, especially in a world where money's getting thrown around like this. Hey, did anybody see John Calipari going to Arkansas? Did anybody see Eric Musselman necessarily leaving and going to USC at the beginning of the season? The point is, when stuff changes, it changes quickly in this day and age. If your donors get on the wrong side of you, that type of deal, things can move very, very quickly. Please do not think Dennis Gates is immune to that. Again, if I'm going to predict something, I think Missouri's significantly better next season. I think they're going to be at the least on the bubble for a tournament appearance. Although I thought that last year too, and that didn't work out so hot. So I guess take that particular opinion with a grain of salt. By the way, I talked mostly about the offensive line, of course, in my previous episode, recapping and discussing the recruiting weekend, the big-time visitor weekend that Missouri had this past week. Of course, more visitors coming in this weekend and probably every weekend of the month of June, I would assume at this point. But while I focused a lot on the offensive line last week, one guy I didn't talk about was linebacker Iosa Epenesa. One thing that's interesting about him is he has, as far as I can tell, this young man has no social media whatsoever. And he's not doing interviews, but his father is handling it. His father, Epi Epenesa, does have a Twitter account, is sort of basically handling that end of stuff for his son, did a fairly lengthy interview with either Rivals.com or Power Mizzou or both. I can't remember off the top of my head. But the point here is it's kind of interesting that a guy, Epi Epenesa, a guy who played football at the University of Iowa, by the way, has an older son who also played at Iowa, who's currently with the Buffalo Bills. Well, it seems like he might know something about this process. And, hey, maybe let's keep my kid young here a little bit. Definitely want him to enjoy all of the trips to Missouri and all the official visits and all that good stuff. But anyway, regardless, Epenesa, definitely an interesting prospect and one that would seem to be heading to the University of Iowa. Let's be honest, with dad and older bro both being Iowa legacies, you got to assume they're the leader in the clubhouse. But again, dad is definitely handling this well. Dad seems to be pretty media savvy. I'll say that. He's saying all the right things and saying that, hey, it's going to be up to my son. It's going to be all his decision and everything. So we'll just have to see what ends up happening with linebacker Iosa Epenesa here in the coming months. And for those of you who are Seinfeld fans, of course, the TV comedy from the 90s, you'll remember when George Costanza worked for the New York Yankees, quit the team in a fit of rage, only to come back on Monday morning, only to pretend that, what, I didn't quit. What are you talking about? Just basically pretending like nothing happened. Well, a similar situation seemed to have unfolded for a former Missouri basketball player that you all will be very familiar with. I want to talk about him and some thoughts on the passing of the great Bill Walton here to close out the show, coming up here right after these quick words. And well after most of the country that entered the transfer portal in basketball has decided on a new destination, and I mean weeks after for the most part, Former Missouri basketball player and current Arkansas Razorback Trevon Brazile is going back to Arkansas. And I got to think that was not his first decision. That is not what he thought was going to happen at this point. I have to say, if anything, I'm a little bit surprised that John Calipari wanted Brazile back. The guy is a tremendous talent. No question about that. A lengthy 6'10" guy, athletic, has a decent jump shot, all that good stuff. I get the intrigue with Brazile. I really do. But it sounded like, if you believe what was going on in Arkansas, well, there were some interesting times in the locker room, that's for sure. And he was a part of the problem. Let's put it that way. Not exactly maybe the easiest guy to get along with. I think maybe Missouri may have found that out as well. I don't know. I don't want to get too far down the speculation road here with Brazile. But I will say this, it's pretty obvious that this was not his first choice, was to end up back in Arkansas. Otherwise, why enter your name into the portal in the first place and then spend that much time looking around and, I guess, apparently not discovering a great landing spot whatsoever? If there were any better options out there, or even similar options for Brazile in the Power Four conferences, if you will, at the high major basketball level, boy, I just didn't see it whatsoever. So I just thought that was an interesting note to leave Missouri fans with. And you know what? I do have some thoughts also to close out the show. This is going to be not really Missouri related, but it's going to be about Bill Walton, who, of course, passed away from cancer, sadly, last week. And I will say this, over the years, Bill Walton definitely had some beefs for sure with the San Diego Clippers, for example. And basically, other than the Celtics, every team he ever played for, he hated their medical staff. But he never had a beef with the game of basketball. Frankly, quite the opposite. I can't think of anybody who loved the game more than that. And really, that's my lasting memory of Bill Walton, who was a guy, my father, a few years older than Walton, and a guy, I think, one thing I love about my dad as a sports fan, and I'll give this up to Bill Walton as well, is they both revere the past of basketball, like Bill Russell, for example, while also totally appreciating the present as a leap forward in so many ways. And a lot of clips are circulating lately about Bill Walton's run as the voice of the Conference of Champions, the Pac-12, for the past few seasons. Well, I grew up for a long time with Bill Walton and Steve the Snapper Jones on the NBA on NBC. And a few years ago, I thought about what an incredible moment we were in, just in terms of basketball, how fortunate we were. This was after Kobe Bryant died. I just thought, man, all these guys are basically still alive. All the greats who have played in the NBA and in NBA history. A couple exceptions to that, like Wilt Chamberlain, of course. But of course, since the Kobe tragedy, we've had Bill Russell leave us. Bill Walton left us, of course, recently. But honestly, to maybe steal a line from the Grateful Dead a little bit, or that idea, I really don't think Bill Walton is gone. I just think he's on another plane. I really do. And, just some great quotes here from Walton and those who knew him best. I just want to leave it with you. He said, one thing Walton said, in life, being so self-conscious, red hair, big nose, freckles, and goofy, nerdy-looking face, and can't talk at all. I was incredibly shy and never said a word. Then when I was 28, I learned how to speak. It's become my greatest accomplishment of my life and everybody else's biggest nightmare. On Bill Walton, Larry Bird said in a statement, "It was a thrill for me to play with my childhood idol, and together we earned an NBA championship in 1986. He is one of the greatest to ever play the game. I'm sure that all of my teammates are as grateful as I am that we were able to know Bill, as he was such a joy to know, and he will be sorely missed." Rick Carlisle, his teammate and current coach of the Indiana Pacers in the NBA, said, "To me, Bill was a living, breathing event in history, just walking around. He played drums for the Grateful Dead at the pyramids in Egypt. He was a guy who did everything, and there's been a lot of talk today about how he speaks in hyperbole and stuff, but he just defiantly competed for every moment in life to be the greatest it could possibly be." And finally, some words from Bill himself. And my whole point is, I just don't think anybody not only loved basketball more than Bill Walton, to me, what a gift for a guy who is that enormous of a man, a 7-footer, and to have the skills that he had, and also to just have such an incredible understanding to me for what basketball really is. This was, again, to show that Bill Walton, not exactly the, back in my day, that kind of guy. Here's what he had to say about Nikola Jokic. He said he's a beautiful player who plays a mental game. He has what seems to have been lost in the world, which is peripheral vision. When you walk down the street in life, when you drive a car, when you ride a bike, it's staggering, the lack of peripheral vision. But Nikola Jokic is the antidote to so many problems in the world. When you see someone like Nelson Mandela or Martin Luther King or a Mahatma Gandhi, someone who sees the future before anyone else, knows how to get where they need to be, where they want to be, that is Nikola Jokic. Happiness begins when selfishness ends. In a game that has been taken over by incessant dribbling for yourself, Jokic is such a breath of fresh air, and it's his imagination. Watching him play basketball is like watching Bob Dylan come up with a song. Now, that's a pretty deep quote in a lot of ways, and it's not just about basketball. That's the interesting thing about Walton. Walton was always had a special way of sort of drawing parallels from the game that he loved to life. And a couple more memorable quotes from Walton here. These are more personal ones for me, just ones I've quoted by Walton for years. Speaking of the Denver Nuggets and guys who wore number 15 for them, well, I remember 2003, I was so bored one day in Springfield down there covering the state tennis championship. I was doing something I rarely did, which is watch an NBA preseason game. Well, this was Carmelo Anthony's rookie year. And you might remember Carmelo Anthony, while not as huge of a deal as LeBron James that season in that draft, he wasn't far behind. He really wasn't. Coming off a national championship at Syracuse as a true freshman, beating Kansas, by the way. Thank you very much. Well, just one of the funniest things Bill Walton ever said to me was, who would have thought Denver in our lifetimes would actually be relevant in the type of hyperbole that Walton became known for? But also, Walton could be rather critical as well. As much as he loved the game, he could definitely criticize some guys that he felt like weren't really up to the task, including, hey, another Jayhawk, Greg Ostertag. Yes, back in the day, Walton would always pick on Greg Ostertag, it seems like. The big 7-foot stiff, I'll call him. If you remember Ostertag for the Utah Jazz, you know exactly what kind of player he was. Well, again, Steve the Snapper Jones one time, he was going, you know what, Bill, you're awful hard on Ostertag. Why don't you be nice to him for a change? And then a couple plays later, Walton, as only he could, said, what an outlet pass by Ostertag. Just one of the great lines of all time. And you know what? One of the great men, I think, in the history of basketball as well. Certainly no one who loved it more. And you know what, Bill Walton, hopefully I'll get to meet you on that other plane one day. But until then, and hopefully that's not too soon, by the way, but until next time, I am John Miller, and thanks as always for listening to Locked on Mizzou.